Something doesn't seem quite right.
Welcome back to Not Quite Right. My name's Ed.
And I'm Amanda.
Amanda, on today's show, we're going to be talking about reboots.
Yes.
Do we love them?
We love them.
Do we hate them? There's only one way to find out. And we'll be saying hello to our friends as we talk about one of your favourite childhood stories.
That's right.
Babysitter's Club. Do you understand that reference? Say hello to friends.
Excuse me, do I understand the reference?
Okay.
I am the reference.
I've had that song stuck in my head for like 3 days now.
Yes. So. Same, by the way.
So last time we spoke, you said you were going to do NaNoWriMo.
Yes, happy Nano.
So have you stuck with it?
I have.
Yeah?
It's been 4 days.
4 days?
4 days, and I've done over 1,667 words each day.
I'm genuinely impressed.
Thank you. Because I'd done a little bit before Nano started, I'm over 10,000 words now, which is about, I don't know, a quarter or a fifth of what I want.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like total for my particular book.
It's good. I think you were kind of a bit shaky last time you messaged me.
I know. I think it's just the pressure. I've done Nano a couple of times. I've never officially signed up for one thing, and I have never completed it.
Yeah.
But I've had a good crack a couple of times. NaNoWriMo, for people who don't know, is short for National Novel Writing Month. It originated in America, which would explain the short-sightedness of how far it might go.
Exclusion of the rest of the world.
Yeah, like the World Series. So lots of people all over the world participate in NaNoWriMo, and the idea is to basically write 50,000 words in a month. And so you split it up, and the month is November, and you split it up, and it ends up being about 1,667 words a day if you write every day, and then obviously more if you miss weekends or however it works. So it's quite a lot.
That is a lot of words.
It's a lot of words. I mean, for retirees or people who don't have a full-time job or don't have young children like me with a part-time job as well, it might be a little bit more straightforward to sit down. Even then, I think it's a big ask.
Yeah.
But for people who are trying to fit it in around day-to-day life, it can be pretty challenging, which is why I have not succeeded in achieving 50,000 words.
Do you think what you've got is going to be a completed piece at the end of the month? Or
I'm hoping for a completed first draft. Yeah, I mean, it'll be a rough first draft, but I had done a lot of pre-work in terms of plotting things out over time, so I'm not coming at the page blank.
Yeah, I think it would only work if you come in with a real plan.
Either come in with a real plan or just come in with an attitude of, as long as I put words on the page, it does not matter. They do not have to make sense.
That's true, but one of those approaches, I think, generates a better result than the other one. If you come in with a plan and an outline.
Absolutely. I mean, certainly for me, because I get, in my own head and I start to question everything and start to think, oh, this doesn't make any sense, and that gets a little bit disheartening. But for some people, it just flows like that. They come to the page and they're like, their imagination just kicks off and they go for it. And sure, their first draft probably needs a lot of work, but it's still a first draft.
Yes.
And, just because I have a plan doesn't mean mine's going to make any sense either. So you've never attempted it?
I've never attempted it, and I'm not sure if I ever will.
No.
I'm also not the kind of person who just bangs out like 2,000 words in a sitting. Maybe that might come with practice.
Look, like I said, I think it's an attitude. It's an attitude of like, I don't care. Like it just has to be. It doesn't have to be good.
Yeah, there's definitely something to be said for just forcing yourself to sit down at the desk and actually put something down.
And because you're almost certainly going to have stuff that you keep. You hope so anyway. Like that's certainly what I'm hoping. Sometimes I come at the page and think, oh, this isn't too bad actually. And then sometimes I think, oh God, this is utter garbage, set it on fire. But it's something, it's a starting point, and, you can't edit a blank page.
Just don't reread what you've written and you'll be fine.
How dare you?
Keep going.
How dare you? Rereading is how I procrastinate from actually writing.
That is actually my big problem. Rereading the same thing I've written 56 times and getting it just right.
Getting
and
it
being
perfect.
Like,
oh, it's perfect. It's delicious. Yeah. No, I've been guilty of that in the past. I have to say, I started using Scrivener, which I was a bit hesitant to do, but I started fiddling with it and I quite like it. And one of the things I like about it is that because you can break it up into these sub-documents, you can sort of just start from the start of where you were.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so instead of going all the way back to chapter 1, if you're in the document that's chapter 5 or 6 and you're tempted to restart reading, you can do that just from the start of chapter 5 or 6 in a way that feels easier and more separate than a Word document, for example, which just flows and flows. So I like that about
That's
it.
definitely good. And it's such a bad habit because when you start a story, you're not necessarily going to end up using the same paragraph as your opening anyway. Like you're just wasting time.
Almost certainly not. And I think that's where I got messed up in my last first draft that I did. I got so attached to things that really shouldn't be there because I'd spent so much time agonizing over. And they did, I think anyway, I think they were worded really well, you know, they flowed nicely, but they shouldn't be there. And you just can't, it's just very hard to delete something that you've spent so much time on, big chunks of something,
Absolutely.
I should say too. And I'm determined this time to just let it be a really rough first draft and just come at it big picture rather than obsessing over the detail until I actually know that what's there needs to stay there. So hopefully I will have that. Hopefully if I'm doing nano, you know, you come out with something rough and then you can start to chip away at it.
Let's talk about reboots.
Well, I guess the big thing about reboots, it's such a buzzword. There's probably not really a great definition of what a reboot is. So I just wanted to sort of explore that with you today. I want to explore it through the world of the Karate Kid, right? I want to go into the Karate Kid franchise because I feel like it's a perfect way to explore what all these different types of, in this case it's movie, but we can look at it as any kind of fiction, I suppose. So we've got the original, right? We've got the Karate Kid. So the Karate Kid, 1984, most people would be familiar with it. And that's it. Iconic movie. So then we've got the Karate Kid Part 2 and the Karate Kid Part 3.
Yep.
So they're just straight sequels, right? Ralph's still going.
No funny
Daniel's
business.
son. No funny business. A couple of like little doinks on the nose or whatever if you get out of line from Mr. Miyagi. But apart from that, no funny business. Okay, so then we get to the next Karate Kid.
Is that the one? So I'm pretty sure I've only seen Karate Kid Part 1. I haven't seen beyond that.
Okay,
but then
well, that's fortunate.
So the next Karate Kid
The
was
next
a girl,
Karate Kid
right?
is Hilary Swank, right?
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Oh, does that make it better? It
No, I
doesn't
just
make
didn't
it
know who it
better.
was.
I reassure you it doesn't make it better. So Mr. Miyagi's still there,
Yep.
but Daniel's not there. So we've got Hilary Swank instead. So this is where it starts to get a little bit messy, right? Because it's a sequel in the sense that it's still just continuing on. Mr. Miyagi's still there. That we're not sort of messing with the original kind of world of the story. But we've got a new protagonist.
Yep.
So to me, that we can't call that a sequel. It's not a sequel. The sequel would be what's happening to Daniel now, right? So I'd call that potentially a spin-off. But then it's complicated because we're not spinning off. Hilary Swank wasn't in any of the sequels or the original. Mr. Miyagi was, of course, but he's not the protagonist here. But nevertheless, I feel like, look, it's the same world. It's the same story world, but we're taking it on a new, like we're spinning out from that original world and we've got a new story, albeit a very similar story about a young karate kid discovering themselves and growing through Mr. Miyagi's advice and wisdom.
My opinion on that, I think spin-off's different. I think to be categorized as a spin-off, you need to have that character already exist in the show. Like even if it was a minor character in Karate Kid 3, say, then that could be a spin-off.
I fully agree with you. My only issue is that I just don't know what else I would call it. I mean, apart from just an absolutely offensive cash grab, I don't know what else to call it.
Yeah, I think that's a sequel because the example that I thought of was Star Wars. Like you have the Star Wars sequels
Classic.
and they come with the prequels, right? Which are prequels, but obviously all the actors are different. It's not a reboot. I think you can have a prequel and a sequel with different characters. I think that's okay.
I see your point because we're looking at different protagonists in Star Wars as well. All right, so moving on from there, right? Then we've got the Karate Kid 2010. So we've got Jaden Smith here.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that one.
Mr. Miyagi is no longer with us here in this world, and it's Jackie Chan. And funnily enough, there's not even any karate. So it's kung fu. It's set in China. And talk about shameless cash grabs.
So is that a reboot or a remake?
Well, this is where, I haven't actually seen it. So I was having a little looky-loo, and apparently it's a remake because it's pretty, even though we're talking kung fu and Jackie Chan, it's apparently a pretty faithful, almost scene by scene kind of adaptation, I guess, of what we were talking about in the original. So I would absolutely call that a remake. A reimagining, maybe?
Yeah, I think that's a tough one, but all remakes to some extent, like they modernize, they reimagine certain things that just wouldn't work.
To varying degrees. And I mean, I think the classic for the remake is Disney. They remake upon a remake upon a remake. Yeah. So we might have a quite faithful remake, which is just like, look, it's a cartoon now and we're doing it this way, but it's the same old Cinderella. Whereas at other times, you know, we're going a bit more left of centre, where we're taking something in a new direction. All right. So anyway, then we've got apparently rumours of a Karate Kid 2024, the Karate Kid 2024. Now, we don't know much about this one. We don't know. It's Sony's doing it apparently, but apparently it's continuing on from the original storyline. So it's still in that same world. It's not a new story as in the Jaden Smith adaptation. This is like a continuation. A continuation
of the original. So we're discarding Jaden Smith. Never happened.
Jaden Smith never happened. Okay. We can just pretend it never happened. And let's say it does have some of the original cast and we know they're still acting and it's continuing on Daniel's story from the original. Like it's a sequel. I'd call that a revival, right?
This is kind of Top Gun territory. Same guy playing the same actor playing the same character 20, 30, however many years on.
Let's say it is. Let's say it is for argument's sake. I'd call it a revival. It's sort of it's special. You don't see that often. Anyway, then we've got my favourite of the bunch, Cobra Kai. I would call Cobra Kai a reboot. You could argue it's a spin-off because we're looking at the character of Johnny. At least in the original first season of Cobra Kai, it's Johnny's point of view. We start to branch out a little bit into other characters as we go along. It's a continuation of the same story, but it's Johnny's world. Daniel's still there, but we're looking at everything from Johnny's perspective. Now, I guess you could call it a spin-off, but what I think is a little bit different to what a classic spin-off is that Daniel's still looming large here. And it's like a sequel.
Yeah.
But I think the really key thing is too, and what I think tips it over into reboot territory, is that now we've got a whole new cast of characters. So it's the young kids who are now coming into the dojos of these senseis and we're looking at their story. And, of course, in that sense it's being modernised too and in quite a funny way, I would say, that Johnny really makes it really fun to modernise this story because he's so stuck back in the 80s basically, and these kids are coming at him with these new terms and all this new stuff and he's very unfamiliar with it. So we've got middle-aged men who still hold this grudge from the All Valley tournament back in the 80s, and yet it's this whole new cast of characters too, and it's this new modern take on something, and it's a completely new format because we're talking a Netflix series rather than a film.
Yep.
I think it's got enough different about it that you would call it a reboot. And I don't know that matters or not, but
the best definition I found of a reboot was that it discards continuity and it recreates its characters.
Yeah. Right, so we're talking about literally rebooting a computer. Like we're restarting. Let's start from scratch kind of thing.
But it sounds like in this case things that did happen in the show have actually happened. Yes. You know, so it's not
we're not
really,
messing with the chronology here.
The continuity is still there, and that's what we take Star Wars as well. Like there's continuity all the way through. It's not like they're restarting again with a new trilogy. So it's a spin-off, but like in the weird way that it's not a spin-off of the same.
I mean, I think you could spin off oh gosh, I can't think of an example, but I'm sure you could spin off a town, right? Like I'm sure there's been TV series where actually someone was just a walk-on character, and it's not springing to mind right now, but a walk-on character who then, gets their own entire show.
Yep.
And in that sense, it's not a spin-off because it's really got nothing to do with the original.
Better Call Saul is almost that to Breaking Bad because Saul Goodman was.
I feel like Better Call Saul is like an absolute classic spin-off. That's a perfect example of a spin-off.
But it's also a prequel, so there is a lot of overlap here. Like
absolutely no, and I mean it doesn't matter. I suppose it's more just you hear this term reboot getting bandied about, and it's just trying to understand. Well, what does that really mean? And I guess it's kind of what it really means is it's a marketing term that they use to try and get the old fans back onto something new. But in terms of Cobra Kai, because it is still in that original story world, but I think it's just got so much that's new. It is a completely new story. I mean, basically we're looking at the same world again, but this time Daniel's the bad guy. instead of the good guy.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about it. I was starting to think about, well, what makes a good reboot or a good reimagining of a story?
Yep.
Right? So I was thinking, number one, to me, cast. You have to have key members of the original cast. Key
for
members.
a reboot.
Well, depends how you look at reboot. Because if we start going down the sort of superhero movie realm, you might have completely new cast of characters. But I'm talking about this type of reboot, this type of like, okay, we're taking something that was mega popular back in the 80s or back in some past period of time, and we're going to present it fresh to a new audience. And if you're going to do that, you need the original cast.
Yep.
So I'm thinking here too of The Mighty Ducks, right? Which I still haven't watched, which I shock even myself having not watched it, but it's not appealing to me because get out. No, I just think like it's not appealing because I think it's something else. You've given us something else here. There's not enough. There are some original cast members, but it's not enough. There was Home Sweet Home Alone.
Yes.
You've seen Home Alone,
I've seen Home Alone.
Oh, thank God. Okay, so Home Sweet Home Alone is just a completely new movie.
Yeah.
But we have one of the original cast members from Home Alone, which is Buzz, the big brother. And look, it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. I guess to me, like if you really wanted to redo or reboot or revive Home Alone, it must have Macaulay Culkin in it.
Yeah. So if you're going for that nostalgic reboot, like
yes, this is what I'm talking about.
Exactly, like Cobra Kai, like you're targeting people who have watched and loved the original. Yeah. And in that case, I think, you definitely need some sort of anchor. But if you're trying to reboot it for a younger audience, then you don't want Macaulay Culkin anywhere near it.
What?
No, not specifically, but it's not going to be something that that kids really...
It's not relevant to them.
It's not relevant.
That nostalgia doesn't exist for them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It might be a little Easter egg for the parents or something like that. But
yes, got you. So if we're talking nostalgic reboots, number one is the cast. Number two is the script, right? It's still got to be a good script. It's got to be well written. I think people switch off pretty quickly. Look, I have seen Top Gun and I don't know about that script. That's questionable. But I think they went so hard on all the other nostalgic elements and all the cool fight scenes that they got away with it.
Yeah, I've got to say it's a hard one for writers and producers, like, because just about every nostalgic reboot gets completely slammed. And I think actually Top Gun may have been an exception because I've heard good things.
Yeah, it's only had good things said about it.
I think a lot of people, when they really think about it, what they want is almost a remake. Like they want to see the original again. And if it's too different, if it's too new, then it will alienate fans of the original.
I guess it depends because sometimes if you go too hard copying, it just becomes predictable, pointless, and just straight up not a good story.
Yeah.
And I would say I'm probably in a unique position where I saw the new Top Gun and I haven't seen the original Top Gun, right?
Yeah.
I started watching it and got bored because it's not really my thing and never finished it. And so I've seen the new one, but like even I could tell what the references were because it was so...
Because they were winking at you basically.
Oh, they were so winking at you, and Tom Cruise, oh gosh, he's a winker. Like... So, like it was funny though. I think when you're going to that sort of movie, you're there to just have a laugh. You're there to have a smile. You're not there to be educated.
Yeah.
But I disagree with you because you're saying you've got to be sort of really true to the story. And I think what you need if you're going to really successfully reboot something is you actually need something fresh because otherwise what are we doing here? You need to have a fresh idea. And whether that's just bringing something like into the modern era, which is a bit what Cobra Kai does. But I think the cool thing about Cobra Kai, the really cool thing is that we're getting the original villain's perspective. I think that's what makes it really interesting.
Yeah. You've got to have enough of what made the original great without just redoing the original, I think is what makes it challenging. So going to the category which I've called chronic reboots, which I think are the most interesting because being a reboot is kind of baked into what those movies are about. And the big one, like the number one for me is James Bond, which is like rebooted every decade since, the 50s. And that's just part of it. And you expect it's going to end and then it's going to be rebooted. And it's the same character their whole backstory is retold. It can be changed. It can be shifted.
And it doesn't matter because it's a stupid idea in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's an audience for it and you know what to expect.
You know, my friend Tracy, hi Tracy. Tracy's a big fan of James Bond. But I feel like they're also different. How do you remain a fan, you know, through the ups and downs, of reboot world? Yeah. But look, what about Batman? Wait. Who's your favourite Batman?
It's obviously George Clooney.
I mean, the George Clooney Batman, if we're talking cheese, it was amazing. It was amazing. My favourite Batman is Michael Keaton.
That's a good choice.
Thank you. But I am also partial to a Christian Bale push-up. Sorry, go on. I'm distracting myself. Go on. Well, I mean, we like to talk about writing. Like, to what extent do you think, like, if we're talking Batman here, to what extent does the writing feed into that? I mean, a lot of these, especially the superhero movies, it's all about the sets and the costumes and the stars that you get to play these characters. I know for me, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, if it's poorly written, it just doesn't.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time in Hollywood, like the script is almost an afterthought. Like they, I
certainly
imagine
for
the
these
process,
superhero movies.
Yeah, I imagine the process is like, let's make a Batman movie. Yeah. Who do we want as Batman?
Yes,
let's get that
step
guy.
one.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. Let's get someone to write it.
Who's free?
Who's free? No. We're going to need like 6 people to write it. And I think the bar is like, does this screenplay work?
Can we shoot it?
We can shoot it.
How much is it going to cost? I think it's probably the first question.
Exactly. It's not really about telling a story. It's all kind of from the top down.
And maybe that's why I just don't connect with these movies so much. I mean, certainly I've seen my share of superhero movies and some are better than others. But see, that's where I would start to say, why are some better than others? And it's because someone bothered to actually create a story, not just a visual orgy of whatever they've got going on. It's a story, and you're seeing a character arc, you're seeing something happen, you know, and you're invested in the characters. And I think so often, you know, if you're talking these real 2-dimensional cartoon characters, you don't get invested in them. You're just there to like eat your popcorn and be like passively sit through it, and then it's done and you've forgotten about it the instant you walk out the door.
You want to see some cool shit up on the screen.
Yeah. I mean, and there's an audience for that, but that's not me.
Now it's time for the segment we like to call Get Wrecked, in which we force each other to enjoy things that we like. So
Correct.
This week you've inflicted upon me The Babysitter's Club.
Yes.
So tell me, why have you made me read this?
Listen, I'm well aware that The Babysitter's Club is not a literary masterpiece, but I credit Anne M. Martin and this series with why I want to write. It's the reason I want to write, and it's the type of thing I want to write in my soul. And I don't know if that's connected to some deep trauma within me somewhere that I haven't really come to terms with, but it really is this profound influence on me and on who I was growing up. And I guess I still look at it now as something that I guess I almost don't even understand it, the power it had over me. And I wanted to revisit it, and I wanted to see what you think as an objective party coming in from the outside, absolutely not the demographic whatsoever, and see what you thought.
Yeah. My experience until last week with The Babysitter's Club, I remember it as a child in school, in maybe year 5, year 4. All the girls were just completely obsessed with Babysitter's Club, and all the boys were baffled by their obsession. Like as a boy, it was just, why do these girls want to look after babies?
See, that's fascinating to me because I didn't know or care what boys thought at that time, so I've never really turned my mind to what boys thought.
Don't get me wrong, that we weren't like perplexed and racking our brains. We were just like, really?
Were you discussing it in your book clubs?
Yes, we were very preoccupied. No, it was just kind of dismissed, and so I read the first book, which is Christie's Great Idea. And I also watched the original 1990 TV series, the first episode. And
which wasn't actually Christie's great idea,
That's right.
It was Marianne and...
Yeah, it was Marianne, and it was the one about Logan, I think.
Marianne and the brunettes.
Name?
Yeah, Logan, yeah.
And also the reboot, speaking of reboots, the first episode of the reboot, which was Christie's great idea. So, yeah, look, as a book and reading this now in my 40s, I'm obviously not the demographic, not the target demographic, but I do read books aimed kind of probably a little bit younger to my daughters. And it wasn't bad as far as kind of that kind of genre of book goes.
I'll take that as glowing praise from you.
Yeah. So I think just things I noticed about the book, they're not so much about the babysitting. Like they're very much about
saying hello to your friends.
About saying hello to your friends, about friendship. They're about the kind of themes that obviously kids of that age are affected by, are interested in, and the characters reflect that. And really, the parts where they're actively babysitting are the minor parts of the story. And in fact, they're probably, in this book, it's probably the least interesting part where they do share the stories about the four characters doing the babysitting and what happens in the antics. The book's not really about that, and for me reading it, that didn't really appeal to me. But you've got the themes about the characters. They're obviously going through things like divorce,
not their own personal
divorce, but parents. So Christie's parents are her mother's getting remarried. That's a major theme, and obviously something that affects a lot of kids that age. We have some of the kids, basically discovering boys, and some of the kids being at different levels when it comes to that, I guess.
Listen, now you've assumed some knowledge here. We should probably just give a brief overview of the plot. So Christie's Great Idea is the first book in a very long series, multi-book series, and basically it tells the story of Christie, who has the idea to start a babysitters club. So it's pretty straightforward. The story itself starts with her at school, and she's talking too much in class and she gets in trouble. So that's sort of establishing her character there. But we quickly move into the friendship and into her relationship with her neighbour, her friend across the street, and how these girls come together to form this babysitters club. But on the side, there's this whole sort of subplot about Christie and her family and about her relationship with this incoming potential stepfather and with her siblings, and then obviously her relationship with the friends in the club as well. So as you've indicated, the babysitting is very secondary to all of this stuff. It's the club itself and the idea for that and the friendship that's the key theme. But I think in Christie's Great Idea, actually, the main plot centres really around, apart from starting the babysitters club, it centres around her relationship with her potential stepfather.
Yeah.
And I mean, we're really dealing with the mundanity of early adolescence. It's day-to-day stuff we're talking about here. Pets, brothers, what's for dinner. Like these are the kinds of themes that are coming up.
They love pizza.
They do love a pizza. They love an M&M. And Stacey loves a salad. And then at the end, we end with a sleepover, which is pretty much, if we're talking goals of early adolescent girls, like a sleepover is just pretty much what you're angling for 90% of the time. So that's just a nice way to end that story. So it's fairly straightforward plot.
So there's four main characters, and as I understand it, there are a lot more that kind of get introduced as the series goes on. So the four main characters are Christie, Marianne, Claudia, and Stacey. I think after we spoke last, you asked like which character am I? I didn't find the characters to be that well fleshed out after just the first book.
Yeah, fair.
From what I heard, the different books in the series are written from different perspectives. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the first one is obviously Christie, and you get much more of a feel for her character and obviously her family. So Christie herself is, you'd say she's very extroverted. She loves organising. She's a real doer. She's very, I guess, bossy and, maybe controlling.
So that's a straight me right there.
Right. And her parents are going through a divorce. She's in a situation where her stepdad has moved in. He's very nice and caring and very supportive in the background of the babysitters club, but she obviously doesn't at first recognise that.
Don't spoil it. Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. So as a child, my parents were divorced, and I was in a similar situation at a similar age. But I could sympathise with her and understand exactly that kind of dynamic and that inclination for a child to, regardless of how friendly and supportive the dad was, it's still something that you kind of push back against.
There's a loyalty there somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of misguided or whatever. And so the other characters are much less fleshed out. So Marianne comes across as a quiet person. She's like the opposite, very introverted. So she kind of prefers to work more in the background. And her family situation is her mother has passed away. And that's all I think that we know about her from the book, from the first book. And then we have Claudia, and what we know about her is she has an older sister who is much smarter than her. She's like a very high achieving older sister. And so that's the dynamic that we're kind of is being set up there, living in the shadow of an older sibling, which is, I'm sure, is a very relatable thing to a lot of people as well.
Certainly for my siblings.
Yeah, and we don't get much beyond that. I think she's the only character who's not, I guess, white American. She's from, her family's from Japan. And I think that's, her other characteristic is that she's into boys. And so she's kind of drifted a little bit away from
I mean, that's a
Christy.
classic trope of middle grade. So it absolutely shines through.
And then there's Stacey, who's the new girl in town. And so there's a couple of...
Another trope,
a new girl. But that's, again, another common experience, people moving around. But also she has something that the others don't, in that she's very different. She's from an exotic place, which is New York City. She dresses more stylishly than they do. She's got like something about her that they envy. And we find out that by the end that she's also diabetic. So she's got an illness that she's dealing with too. So I think in those four characters, there's a lot of ground that's covered in just the experience of people in that age group.
No, you're right. And I think that was probably something that was, look, I don't know, because I didn't read widely enough at that age. I read it just a hell of a lot of Babysitter's Club. But I think it probably did. It was a little bit ahead of its time in terms of how it was showing a diverse range of characters. And not to say it hadn't been done, but this, of course, was much more prolific. So it was something that we saw much more of.
Yep.
And I think just the feminist undertones of it as well. Like I think Anne M. Martin herself is a feminist, you know, and so I guess that's probably what I connected with really under everything, is just this kind of girl power thing, but not a surface level girl power, like a legitimate, these girls can actually start a business, they can achieve what they want to achieve, they've got a great supportive friendship, they've got supportive families, and they're just going to go and get what they want.
Yeah, they have real agency in a way that
a lot of characters in that age group don't, and I think you see it more now. But you know, it's always been there, but I think there was just this more like the maturity of their goals, you know, and I was always a little entrepreneur myself, and so I'm like taking notes, you know, like how can I make money? And I think that was really empowering for young girls to think, oh, actually, not I can babysit, but I can start a business.
I thought that was interesting about the book, because there's nothing in this book that is fantastical. It wasn't about finding a new dimension, or it wasn't about like going to, I don't know, Narnia or something, or hanging out with Transformers or Ninja Turtles or whatever. It's very grounded in reality. And what I said was so baffling is like you're reading a book about looking after kids. Like that's just the most mundane thing.
I think what was interesting to me as an adult too, coming back to the series and sort of just investigating a little bit what it was, why I liked it, and who the author was, you know, not just reading and enjoying the stories, but looking a bit at the context that it was written in, and discovering that, in fact, it wasn't Anne M. Martin's idea. So there was another editor at Scholastic who had read another book about babysitting. So perhaps it's a reboot in itself, but had read a standalone book about babysitting. It was called Katie's Babysitting Job. Right. So similar, and had sort of thought to herself, oh, I can see a bit of potential here, and contacted Anne M. Martin sort of saying, hey, I've got this idea, will you write it? And she agreed. And I mean, give this woman a raise because they started with 4 books. Like it was a 4-book deal. And then they were so wildly successful that they had 2 more books and then 12 more books. And then by the end, I think, checking my notes, I believe it was 213 books. So
wow. Yeah.
213 books by the end, which included a bunch of bumper specials and all different offshoots.
Yeah.
So wildly successful. And it's just fascinating, like to have gone from this small idea. Now, Anne M. Martin herself had ghostwriters. She didn't write all 213. I think she estimated herself she wrote somewhere between 60 and 80 herself, and then no doubt had editing credits on at least many of the others. But to think, like, what is it? What, you know, and I'm saying I credit my whole love of writing to these books.
What do you think it was for you?
Absolutely that agency, that idea, that it was just like this awakening of like, wow, kids that age are doing something that I consider to be a very adult and big thing. And I think it's easy to forget sometimes as adults, like we're talking about these simple themes, but like, is it simple? Is it simple to be experiencing divorce? And is it simple to be experiencing what life is like with a single parent and a mother who died when you were a baby? Like, these are huge themes actually, and they don't really delve into them in a way that's particularly deep or distressing. It's all, you know, the stepfather's lovely and he's very supportive and the mother's just not there, and it just all comes out in the father's a bit anxious, you know, like as if kids don't feel these things deeply, as if kids just aren't conscious of what's actually going on.
Yeah, and it's less about having someone kind of try to talk them through the process of what to do. It's just about seeing someone else going through the similar experiences and seeing how they react. And at least, I guess, you know, to the point I made about when I was a child and going through a similar experience, just seeing someone react in the same way as you, realising that you're actually normal and that these experiences are normal, and because you have like a divorce or maybe you're dealing with an illness or something doesn't make you kind of weird and different.
One thing that I found interesting reading back Christie's Great Idea is just it's not that well written. You know, as much as I love it, it's adverb central.
Yeah.
There's a lot of exposition. It's very much, I'm Christy Thomas and I am bossy. My best friend Marianne is shy. Lots of tell don't show, if you will. But it works. And I guess, you know, I'm trying to write in middle grade, and sometimes, you know, I overthink things and I come back to it and I think, gosh, it's pretty simple. It's a simple story, simply told. And that's all it needed to be.
So let me tell you about the TV shows. So you haven't seen them since you were young?
No, it's been quite a while. I had them all on VHS and I watched them faithfully and repetitively many times. I'd probably watch 5 seconds and then be reminded of the entire thing.
Yeah.
But
yeah, so the first series from 1990, and there was a movie as well, but I think that was later, like 95. I really didn't like the original series. It's very it's very early 90s, but even beyond that, like, so the very first episode is about Marianne. There's no establishment.
It's assumed knowledge.
It's assumed that you've read all of the books.
Yeah.
And probably a lot of the people watching have read all the books.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't just start with these 4 characters. You've got characters and they're obviously part of the Babysitters Club, but they're not mentioned who they are.
You probably didn't know who they were.
I didn't know who they were. And there probably is as a reader, you're like, oh, I know who that is because they're wearing jeans or some distinctive like
that's
thing.
So true.
And the acting was really bad. And even for the standard of kids show.
What are we talking? Are we talking overacting? We talking forgetting lines? What are we talking?
No, they were just not really convincing at all. Like, but the pacing was just all over the place. Like there were very few long scenes. It was all just kind of little quick grabs and then another scene and then quick grabs.
All right, so a thumbs down on the original TV series.
Didn't love it.
Tell me now, how did you feel about the Netflix reboot?
Yeah, so that was much better. And I watched the first episode, Christie's Great Idea. It seemed to be a lot better written. They make an effort to demonstrate what the characteristics are of each or the traits of each character through the dialogue, through each scene, and they try to kind of establish it. There's a lot more care and thought taken as opposed to the first one, which just kind of just tried to hit the beats and you should already know who these people are.
Well, I guess in this case, they really had to reestablish who the characters were because it's a reboot, because it's very much a modern take on, and that's its whole jam. It's a modern take on the Babysitters Club. That's what it is, and that's where a lot of the in-jokes come in and that sort of thing. But it's also something that was designed to appeal to a new audience, as we were talking about before, who doesn't have the nostalgia element. But I think it's probably fairly safe to say it was largely a nostalgia job, and they were trying to get parents who might then watch it with their kids. But regardless, they're creating these new characters. They're creating, yes, they've got those same sort of real core elements, but what does that look like in a modern environment?
Yeah. And I think they were pretty respectful, I guess. So they tried not to change things, I think.
Yeah, I think they did it in a way that was faithful and just like an update rather than like a unpacking and sort of rearranging what was there before. They've just sort of given it a little fresh take.
For example, they mentioned obviously the internet exists, so things are different. But still they went with the flyers. Like they didn't just send out an email. They did do flyers.
They found a way to still make that make sense.
Way. Exactly. Yeah. And they still have the landline in was it Claudia's room?
Claudia's room, yeah. And that becomes a joke, which is fabulous.
And because that's so anachronistic now, they have to explain what it is and they have to explain why it's there, but at least you can see they've made the effort.
Grey hair.
Yeah.
I think as well, what really works for this updated Babysitters Club is the production value. Like they've put some money into it and the actors are good. It's some quality acting, but the sets, the costumes, even the writing, like that, they would have invested some time and money into actually doing a good job of this, for sure. I think. And I love all the little in-jokes. So we've got Alicia Silverstone as Christy's mother. Yeah. Did you catch the Clueless joke?
I thought I did in retrospect because I didn't realise it was her until later. And then I was like, did she use the word Clueless
in fact, I'm not sure if it was that episode now that I think about it, but she does call her mum Clueless.
Yeah, no, I think it was that episode.
Which is great. Like that's appealing to the same audience. It's a completely different reference. But, Alicia Silverstone herself was a fan, and so that comes into it as well. I know that Anne M. Martin was a producer on the series, so I'm sure that played into it as well. But, there is this real sort of respect and kind of like reverence in it. And I think that's what I love about Cobra Kai too. It's this reverence for the original, this love of the original, and you can just see it flowing through. It's not just a cheap cash grab. Like I'm sure they love the money, but that's not what it's for. Someone is passionate about it and they've gone, let's do this and make it great. Let's invest our whole selves into this and make it something that's really wonderful. But having said that, it didn't get renewed for a second season.
Oh, really?
Which I was surprised about because I guess it just didn't get the numbers that they were expecting. But
it has to also be appealing to kids. That's the other thing.
And perhaps it wasn't. I mean, I can't speak.
Well, look, I watched it with my kids. We watched both of them. So the original series, let's call it, they didn't like it. They watched it and they were just like, what was that? I think it just looks really old to them. It just looks really outdated. They can't really relate to these kids.
It's like us watching a black and white movie.
Yeah, but it really is. Like their clothes are just so weird and
it's distracting, I suppose.
The video is so kind of low res of that VHS quality. But I think they liked the reboot.
The reboot, though, something interesting about it too. It's quite old in its themes, adult in its themes at times. As the episodes progress, we start talking about transgender kids. There's a lot to do with sexuality. These themes that weren't explored in the original series. And it's probably appropriate because I think most kids are probably a bit older when it comes to all that stuff and not so, clueless and innocent maybe as they were in the 90s. But that's interesting because I guess my daughters are a little bit younger than yours and I'm not sure I'd be comfortable letting them watch it. Not so much that alternative sexualities and things like this, that's wonderful, but just the way they explore it, it's a little bit more than would be appropriate for that age group.
Yeah, and the original Babysitters Club coming at a time or being fairly unique for its time in how it presented itself. Mm-hmm. It's not really unique anymore.
No.
So they're probably exposed to a lot of the same ideas in different ways through different media, and it may not have that same appeal.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I was trying to get my eldest daughter interested in reading The Babysitter's Club, and she's got very different taste to me. She's a big fan of dragons, and that's we pretty much have opposite tastes. And I suggested it to her, and the look on her face was just like, why?
Yeah.
Why would I read that? It just sounds completely boring.
Yeah.
Nothing happens, and I couldn't sell it to her because she wasn't wrong. So,
all right. So look, Babysitter's Club.
Final verdict?
Final verdict. No. No, look, I can definitely see why it appealed to you.
But we haven't established who you are.
I'm probably Marianne. Like, I'm definitely not a Christie. Am I a Claudia? Like, that's how can I be a Claudia? That's kind of a.
You can't say you're a Claudia. That'd be too up yourself.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to be Claudia.
Yeah, and
I don't know. Are you a Logan?
I don't know much about Logan.
Maybe you're a Mallory.
I don't know who that is.
That's offensive.
All right, so I'm going to go pretty far from the Babysitters Club for my recommendation.
Why am I not surprised?
Yeah, so the whole point of Get Wrecked is to inflict
physical pain.
So I'm going to make you watch Synecdoche, New York, which is a movie from 2008, starring Philip Seymour Hoffman, directed by Charlie Kaufman. Actually, this is a movie I probably watched a couple of years ago, so I can't say it's influential in any way to my writing journey or my life or anything along those lines. But I think it's a good movie about art, what art is, what being artistic is all about, what living a fulfilled life is all about.
I'm hooked. Sounds amazing.
And maybe presenting the story in kind of a different and unique way.
All right. And should we maybe encourage our listeners to join us on this little journey?
Yeah, absolutely. If you haven't
Good luck finding it. Where do we find it?
Maybe I'll put that in the show notes. It shouldn't be too difficult to find. It's not an obscure movie by any stretch, but it's a good one.
Okay, great. I'm looking forward to it, actually. It sounds good.
Okay, I think that's the show for the week.
Yep.
So, Amanda, tell us where people can contact us.
So you can email us at notquiterightpodcast@gmail.com. Catch us on Instagram at notquiterightpodcast and on Twitter, NQW Podcast. And
you can go to notquiterightpodcast.com and there are links there to all of our Twitters and emails.
And make sure you follow the show. You'll get an update when a new episode drops and we'll be able to continue the conversation. Be great.
Right. All right. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Sounds good.
Until then, right on.
Right on.